All right, Big Man, today is Friday. It is February 4th. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. Before we hop into True Crime Friday, I do want to talk about our friends at Fuzzy real quick here. So, Allie, we were talking a little bit earlier. You had a dog? You had a family dog?
Yeah, my parents have a dog.
What's his name?
Charlie.
Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
How's Charlie doing?
She's great. Well, actually, she's not great. She just had surgery on her ATL.
Oh, no.
ATL, that's in your knee, right?
ACL.
ACL. I knew it sounded weird.
Not Atlanta, Georgia. It's okay. I say a lot of weird things too. So listen, so you know what it's like. How did he get injured?
She just got the zoomies.
Oh, really?
I think she was in the grass, like hit a divot.
But like, there's nothing worse when there's like something wrong with your dog and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do?
I know.
So that's why Fuzzy's here, Allie. It's a telehealth service for pet parents that offers 24/7 access to personalized pet care from veterinarian professionals.
I really segued that well.
You did.
I didn't even know that's what you were about to say.
Yes, exactly.
Great.
So, which is great. So even in the middle of the night, if your dog's like, can't catch, whatever, it's not breathing right or whatever, it's there for you. So from everyday questions to the middle of the night emergencies, Fuzzy has the answers pet parents need. Through live chat and virtual vet consultations available to you for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Fuzzy can answer your pet questions big and small, urgent, and every day. Fuzzy can also recommend the exact right products for your pets, all of which are handpicked by their established team of veterinarian professionals and available at discounts exclusive to Fuzzy members. From getting your pet's diet just right, to meeting their middle of the night needs, to finally figuring out what makes their breath smell that way, nothing is too big or small for a quick Fuzzy call. Right now, Fuzzy is offering our listeners a free 7-day trial membership. Go to yourfuzzy.com/dog today to sign up. That's a free 7-day trial at yourfuzzy.com/dog. And for a limited time, Fuzzy is also offering a special discount of $20 off any of your pet products needs. Pet meds, supplements, food, and more with promo code DOG. That's yourfuzzy.com/dog for your free trial of Fuzzy with access to 24/7 personalized pet care and vet-recommended products. So, Charlie, I hope your ACL heals up, and if you ever need help, make sure you tell your parents that Fuzzy is there for you.
Fuzzy. All right.
Get some Fuzzy. All right, Allie, what's the topic of today?
Okay. So before we dive into today's case, just a quick update on the Brendan Santo case, which you were the first one to send it to me. So you broke the news to me. I got a lot of people sent me I think it was on Twitter, and it was a news article that Brendan Santo saw on January 21st, which was it last week? The body of Brendan Santo was recovered. He was found 1.5 miles down the Red Cedar River from where he was last seen. So if you remember, he was last seen leaving Yakeley Hall just before midnight. He was heading towards Brody. And if you're familiar with Michigan State campus, you kind of know the pathway that you take. If you're not, there's this part of the pathway of the sidewalk that you take and you go, which you have to cross over the river. And there is about a 5 to 6 foot gap in the fencing there that separates essentially the river from the sidewalk. Now, where this gap is, the river is not like level with the sidewalk. It's a really, really steep drop down. So once you're like, if you were to go into this where it gaps, where the fence is gapped, it's essentially like a straight drop down. So it's really dangerous. And that is where they believe Brendan entered the river. So he was on his way to Brody, potentially in this 5 to 6 foot gap that's there. He, whether it was mistakenly or what have you, entered this gap. And as soon as you pass through that area, like I said, it's a straight drop down into the river. It's like pretty rocky there. It's not, you can't just like walk into the river. So that being said, obviously this gap is a huge safety concern, which now the family is petitioning to have it closed and make it safer. Especially think about it, like this was just before midnight, so it was dark out. So even in the dark, it's even more dangerous. But that is kind of the update. Good in good news, his body has been recovered. His family has been able to locate him bring him home and get some closure. Obviously, this is not the kind of closure or result that we were hoping for, but in the bigger picture of things, at least they were able to bring him home.
Yeah.
So just wanted to update you guys on that one because we had talked about that very recently.
Mm-hmm.
Now, getting into today's case, today we are going to be covering the somewhat current case of David Elmquist. Have you heard of this one?
I have not.
Okay.
At least off the surface. Sorry, I'm trying to look at pictures of this gap and where it kind of happened.
Look on here.
Might have to make some notes here, maybe add it to the YouTube because this is, I'm just.
Yeah, let me send you a
like
picture
how
of it.
dangerous it was. But yeah, like you said too, that's.
It is on the Bring Brendan Santo Home Instagram as well, the pictures of it.
Okay.
I just sent it to you.
And they're trying to get safety improvements, so.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a page that they've linked as well. So if you can kind of picture it, but like I said, I'll send you the picture if we can put the picture in the YouTube. And you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. It's a very clear, like the fence ends. And if you just go right around it, it's like right in.
Drop.
Yeah. It's a pretty quick drop.
David Elmquist, sorry.
David Elmquist. Mm-hmm. So this one is, I got a lot of listener suggestions for this one. It's like I said, it's relatively recent. It happened in 2018. It's kind of one of those like whodunit cases. And I feel like we haven't done one of those in a while. We've done unsolved cases, but not the like similar to like the John Bonet where there's a big controversy over like how the whole case played out, whodunit kind of thing, which like I said, I feel like we haven't done one of these in a while. And two, normally when we do those, you and I never end up on the same page. So I'm very interested to see, and especially because you haven't heard this one, I'm interested to see where you land on this one. Now, a couple of points to make before we kind of dive into the case facts is, even though this case happened 4 years ago, there is slim to no factual information on this case. And I say factual because I could not find a police report. There are little to no articles on this case, which means to me that indicates that this did not get proper media coverage. Mostly because it seems to me like it was at the beginning a pretty open and shut case, whether it should have been or not. But I don't think it got picked up by the media a lot, if any, because there's not a lot of sources on this case. The main source of information on this case is 99% of it is from the family's point of view and their kind of what they've put into the media and the information that they have shared. So that's just something to keep in mind for this case, is that it's coming from the family telling the story versus like coming from a news article or an unbiased source.
Okay.
So just a couple of things to keep in mind for this case. It really shocked me how little source was on this, but we're going to go off what we can. Just keep in mind, most of this is from the family's point of view. Now, that being said, again, since there are no unbiased resources of it, it is also a high controversy case of like I said, the whodunit. Like, I guess who's telling the truth? Are the police lying? Like the whole nine yards. So it's kind of a mess. Now, you can definitely find arguments for both sides. And that's why I say I'm very interested to see where you land on this. So, David Elmquist, he was only 24 years old. So he was very young when he died. And he died under very mysterious circumstances. Now, David is from Minnesota. He was the son of Scott and Nancy Almquist. And although he was from Minnesota, at the time, he had moved to North Dakota to work in the oil fields with his brother. So he was living out there, and during this time, he had met his wife, Emily Manninen. Now, David and Emily were married in March of 2017. So, I mean, although being, newlyweds, the honeymoon phase, all that you think of in like new marriage. The marriage quickly, if it hadn't started like this already, it had quickly became a big point of friction in David's life. So again, they were married in March of 2017. In February of 2018, so 11 months later, 11 months into married life, David went home to visit his parents' house, and he was like, listen, we need to talk. I need to talk to you guys. David expressed to his parents that his marriage with Emily was extremely toxic, or had turned extremely toxic. He said she was very manipulating on every single thing that he did, to the point where he was like, I cannot do this anymore. And I mean, think about it. This is 11 months into marriage, not even a year into marriage. So it was bad enough to the point where he was like, I want to get a divorce 11 months into this marriage. Now, he was, like I said, he was fed up with it. He was done with it. He could not take it anymore. And so he told his parents, this was on February 9th, that he was having this conversation with them. And he told his parents that the very next day he was going to be moving back home to move back in with them. During this conversation, David's mother, Nancy, asked him or said to him, what would happen, or how do you see this conversation going with Emily? And David's response to that was, Emily would go absolutely ballistic. And I quote, she would go ballistic. Now, obviously this is very concerning for David's parents. This is a hard position that David's in now. He's like, he wants out because he can't be controlled anymore, but he's afraid to have that conversation with her. But his plan was to move in with his parents again, move back home that next day. So, essentially he had made up his mind. He was going to have that conversation with her. So he had this conversation with his parents. It ended with, David knowing that having this conversation with Emily, he knew it was not going to go well. I guess probably, it's not the most joyous conversation to have, but to an extent where he was like, this is going to be really bad.
Mm-hmm. Everyone knows those relationships, right?
Right. It reminds me of, why can't I remember the name? The one we talked about where she moved, after they broke up, she moved to his town, and it was several states away.
Yeah, I know it was Vegas to Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I forget her name. Ariel? Does that sound familiar?
Kind of sounds familiar.
I don't know.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So just not set up for a good situation. Now, 8 hours after having this conversation with his parents, David died of being burned to death. Now, 8 hours.
8 hours.
After having this conversation with his parents. So in those 8 hours, I personally would assume that he went back to his apartment, attempted to have that conversation, or some turn of events happened in that apartment. 8 hours later, the apartment is on fire. David died because of this. Now, official reports, police reports state that David died by suicide. The family is extremely adamant that this is a huge lie. It was not suicide. Now, self-immolation, so suicide by fire, is one of the rarest forms of suicide, first of all. So, not that it's not possible, but it's extremely rare. And I don't think we've ever talked about a case before.
No, I mean, if you've watched a million of these crime shows and whatnot, people usually just use that to burn evidence typically.
Right.
And there's some that blunt force trauma or something to
make
it happen. And then but yes, correct. So my radar's already up.
Yeah. That is what's stated in the official report, is that it was self-immolation, suicide by fire. Family says, no way. absolutely not true, especially because based on the conversation that they just had with him 8 hours before this happened, right? Now, within those 8 hours, after the apartment was already on fire, there was at some point, and this is very vague, so at some point, a call was put into 911. What was said on that call is also very vague. Whether it was somebody calling there was a witness, and we'll talk about the witness. There was a call to 911, whether it was, hey, there's an apartment on fire, or whether it was, hey, I'm in danger, or what have you. We just know that there was a call put in, right? Now, again, it's a very vague, but once the call was put in, firefighter and police show up. Now, where it gets into kind of a he said, she said situation is there is this witness that is discussed in the sources. We know it's a girl because they say she. It does not ever mention this witness's name, but the way it is mentioned in these sources is essentially there's no other option but for it to be Emily, right? So we can assume that it's Emily. It has not been clear, and I think that because this is coming from, family and friends' point of view, they may not be mentioning her name specifically to kind of cover themselves, to make sure they're not getting themselves in trouble, whether it's, Emily suing or what have you. So they say the witness. There are points where the witness is mentioned as Miss X. So again, we know it's a girl. And by what the witness is explaining and all this stuff, you can make a very educated guess that it is Emily. So I will still refer to this person as the witness because, again, it's not clearly specified, but know that that's kind of what we're talking about here. So this witness calls 911. The police arrive, and the witness told police that David was inside and he had knives and that she thought he was a danger. She was very scared by him. He was dangerous because he was inside and he was with knives. Keep in mind, the apartment's on fire. Now, due to this statement by this witness saying David is inside and he has knives, the police decided that it was a threat to them to enter the apartment. Not only was it a threat to them, but if it's a threat to them, it's also a threat to the fire department. So they told the fire department to stand down, not to go inside and do a rescue or, fire control or whatever. Authorities stood outside of this apartment while on fire for 39 minutes and just called his name. David, if you're in there, come out. David, that thing. 39 minutes after the call, after the 911 call went in, it was 39 minutes until authorities even approached or tried to enter the home. When in terms of life-saving measures, that is an eternity. That is a long time. Now, when police finally did decide that they, were going to take action, it was then and only then that they decided they were going to shoot out the windows to let some of the smoke out. Which, okay, to me, I mean, in my opinion, that's a very risky move because if you're shooting out the windows, you could accidentally hit David, right?
Yep.
But that's besides the point. Now, they shoot out the windows, yada, yada, yada. At this point, miraculously, David is still alive. He's been in there for 39 minutes and since the 911 call came in. So he has been in this fire or this burning apartment for a long time. Now, again, miraculously at this point, David was able to kind of muster up the strength. He was in bad condition, but he was able to kind of muster up the strength and drag himself out of this burning apartment. 90% of David's body was burned, and he was almost completely blind. And as you can imagine, after being in a apartment that's on fire for over 40 minutes, he was having trouble breathing. So as soon as he got himself out, he collapsed and he was taken to the hospital. Now, as we know, David is now deceased because of this. Like I said, 90% of his body was burned. Now, the family later requested autopsy photos because they had felt that this investigation, something was not right between how the investigation was handled. The investigation was handled, the reasonings that came in, answers that came out of it, and the way that the police were acting. They're like, this is not, and their context between like I said, the conversation they had just had with David. So because of all this, they're like, okay, we're going to request the autopsy photos. And I say request those because those are not just like given out even to like the friends or the family or the next of kin, whatever, because not everybody wants to look at those, right? That's not always how you want to look at the person that you just lost. But they requested them because they were like, something is not right here. Now, there is an Instagram, which we can post. They have an Instagram page, and they have posted some of the autopsy photos. And you can tell that they posted both autopsy photos and crime scene photos on here. And you can tell that there are definitely some points of question. So let me pause here. Of this story that you have heard, before I get into some of the questions that I have, what are your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it sounds like, just based on what you're saying, that the autopsy photos may show some type of restraint or something, that he had a hard time getting out of the house maybe. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're right. To be in there for 39 minutes and then finally walk out, I don't know. And then there's a witness that's like fishy. Mm-hmm. And then there's the knives factor. There's like a lot going on. Yeah. So
there's a lot of questions. Like I said, the sources and the resources and the information on this case are super slim. Mm-hmm. So once you go through those sources, I personally still had a ton of questions. Yeah. Were there any other witnesses? This is an apartment building. Like witnesses, security cameras. This is happening in 2018, right? Were there security cameras? Did David actually bring up the conversation of divorce? Is that how we got here in the first place? See, what doesn't make sense to me right off the bat with this is, so they were saying, okay, David's a threat. We can't go inside, yada, yada. So the police waited, didn't go inside. And then they do decide to go inside, and David drags himself out of the apartment because no one's coming in to save him. He dies of those complications of being burned and being in that apartment for way too long without any rescue. Key point is here, he drags himself out of the apartment. Where did we go from him saving himself to this is a suicide?
Well, to be fair, I mean, there are people who would have regret,
like change their mind.
Yeah,
you're saying
like that's entirely possible, I think.
Okay,
right? Like I think that's fair. Yeah, that's a thing. Like you hear people who. I watched a really good documentary at one time. I believe it was called "The Bridge." I want to say.
That sounds familiar.
And it's about. Hold on, let me try to make sure. Because I would definitely want people to. It's called The Bridge, and it's a documentary about people who commit suicide off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh yeah, I've heard several stories of like there was one guy that survived. And
they had a couple subjects on there who survived. At least one. You might be right. And they basically what they did is they camped out across from the bridge for a year, and they just got footage.
A year.
Yes, and I believe it was a year or whatever. It was an extended period of time.
Wow.
And they were getting live footage of people actually committing suicide.
Holy.
Yeah. And one of the guys who lived, like, he talks about how, like, you know, I believe he talks about how, like, once he jumped, like, he knew, like, it was just a mistake.
He was like, he regretted it.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I saw a video I didn't see the documentary, but I saw him do a video, if it's the same guy, do a video on, he's like, as soon as I stepped off that, I regretted it.
Yes.
So yes, you're right. That's fair. Yes, he could have changed his mind. Now, other questions I have as far as this goes is like, you know, the obvious question, which I'm pretty sure we know the answer to, is the witness Emily. But even so, even no matter who this witness is, when police arrive, they just, what it sounds like to me is they just believed this witness right off the bat. They're like, oh, well, she said so. So it must be true. He must be in there with knives. Like, not that there was really like a good way of figuring that out without putting themselves in danger if he really was in there with knives.
Yeah.
But again, it's like, all right, so just because she said so is like, that's what we're going to go off of here. Now, again, I say 39 minutes after the 911 call is when they decided they were going to shoot out the windows so that they could let the smoke out. Why did they wait that long to do that? Like, they could have been, okay, hey, he's a threat to us, but let's at least break these windows so we can let the smoke out, so that, you know, even if he's a threat, we don't want him to die, right? So why wasn't that executed sooner? That does really not make sense to me. And that's where I think that may have been a mistake on the police department's part, or even police/fire department's part, where whether it was they didn't think about it soon enough or what have you. I think that they should have done that a lot sooner, and we may have a very different outcome. The last thing that I would kind of question before we get into these, there's several points of controversy, which we'll go over. But the last kind of thing was, again, it says David dragged himself out of the apartment, right? It does not say how, as far as where his exit point was. To me, when I was doing the research, I assumed that it was the door, right? Because that would kind of be your first thought. But the windows were also now broken. So did he go out one of the windows that they broke to let the smoke out? Did he take himself out the door?
And that's not released?
In these sources, it does not say. It just said he got himself out.
Okay.
And that does like play a part in it. So just one of the questions I have is, yes, he got himself out. I assume it was by the doorway because it was not specified otherwise. Like, if it was out this broken window or what have you, like, I feel like it might have been specified. But we're going to get into there are several points of controversy, several points that just don't add up, or several points of questioning here.
Before we get into part 2, though, I do want to say you want to go check out Upstart, everybody, because, you know, if you're someone who has multiple credit card balances each month and you're only paying the minimums and you're barely making a dent in your credit card debt, it could be very discouraging. I know that. Everyone understands that. So make sure Upstart's a service you check out, because they want to help you. So whether it's paying off credit cards, consolidating high-interest debt, or funding personal expenses, over 1 million people have used Upstart to get one fixed monthly payment with a clear payoff date. Upstart knows you're more than just a credit score, so rather than looking at your credit score alone, Upstart's model considers other factors like your income, employment, and other information provided in your loan application to find you a smarter rate for your loan. You can check your rate without impacting your credit score in just 5 minutes for loans between $1,000 to $50,000. And you can even receive these funds as fast as one business day after accepting your loan. So find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today when you go to upstart.com/Eddie. That's upstart.com/Eddie, EDDIE. Don't forget to use our URL because it lets them know that we sent you. Once again, loan amounts will be determined based on your credit, income, and certain other information provided in your loan application. Go to upstart.com/Eddie and start saving, start being smarter. That's the right word. Not saving, being smarter, okay? Be smarter about your debt. Use Upstart. Also, I do want to talk about Roman, everybody, because Roman, it's Friday night. You're thinking about your plans. You're thinking about the possible situation where, hey, maybe you get lucky. Maybe you're going to get some action. You got to get Roman if you're going to get action. I mean, it's just that imperative. It should be in your wallet. It should be right next to your debit card, right next to your ID. It should be right next to everything. So Roman swipes, they are Roman, first of all, is an online men's health company, and they're changing the game with these swipes, okay? Because it's the secret to longer lasting sex. Roman swipes are a clinically proven way to last longer in bed. They're effective, easy to use, and they're fast acting, but they don't require a prescription. Roman can ship swipes to you in discreet, unmarked packaging, and each swipe packet is small enough to hide in your wallet for whenever you need it. They're super easy to use. Just take the swipe out of the packet, swipe it on, let it dry, and you're good to go. That's it. Go to GetRoman.com/dogwalk, and you get your first month of swipes for just $5 when you choose a monthly plan. That's GetRoman.com/dogwalk. Go do it, people. Friday night, you want to be prepared. You want to be equipped. You want to go into the bedroom. You want to be putting on your best performance. GetRoman.com/dogwalk is going to do that for you. All right, let's hop into part 2 here.
And this is really where it gets into like how you can kind of pick a side. Now, with the information that I've shared thus far, there's a couple of theories here. One, David brought up the topic of divorce. Emily actually did go ballistic like he thought she would. Attempted to kill David, lit the place on fire, and then positioned herself as the victim to the police, which is why the police then positioned this case as a suicide. That's one theory. Another theory would be that police positioned this case as a suicide because they messed up. They did not handle the situation or the investigation correctly. They did not, they didn't shoot out the windows sooner. They didn't do life-saving measures soon enough. They realized that the evidence on the inside, whether it be the autopsy or the investigation or the crime scene, what have you, did not line up with how they handled the situation. And it was making them look bad, so they needed to position it to kind of cover themselves, which is why they positioned it as a suicide, so they weren't going to get backlash. Last theory is that David was suffering from some mental health issues. There was some sort of break, and David actually did attempt to commit suicide, did light it on fire, did have a knife. That's still a possibility, right? Again, we don't have that many answers, and this case is the sources are coming from the family who do not believe that are the answers. But anything is possible, right? So that's kind of where we're standing here. Now, 5 things that don't really add up here. This star witness that they mention had told authorities during this whole situation at the beginning, told authorities that David had poured an accelerant, which was actually found out to be crude oil, over the top of his head, which then covered his entire body, and then lit himself in the fire and the apartment on fire. So this is what she is saying happened. David took the oil, poured it all over himself. Again, she's positioning it to the suicide, right? This obviously would explain all the burns. However, with the burns that are on David's body in the autopsy photos, there are 2 points of his body that are not burned and that essentially were protected from the fire. It's these 2 spots like on the inside of his wrist, on both wrists. Those are the only 2 spots. Like I said, 90% of his body was burned, but there are 2 spots, and there is a picture of this, so we can include that, where it's not burned, there is not soot. It's a very clear spot. Mm-hmm. So this is just kind of, this brings a lot into question, right? Yeah. So this is something, the 2 spots is something that the medical examiner did not include in their autopsy report. This is something that the family brought up and questioned after they had requested those autopsy photos. The family believes that these are indications, those clean, unmarked areas, those protected areas on each of his wrists, they believe that these indicate where David was standing at the time of ignition. The ME stated that, David must have been wearing gloves, which that's a misstep right there, because David's hands are extremely burned. So if he was wearing gloves,
doesn't add up.
That does not add up. My initial thought with this, I could be completely off, but my initial thought of this was, did he have anything on his wrist? Was he wearing, watch on this wrist, brace on this wrist, whatever? That's not mentioned. Was he restrained in any way? Were his wrists restrained in any way? To where, like, say if you had something that was restraining you, it's not gonna, that's gonna burn first before it got to his skin. Or as far as like the indication of where he was standing, I guess I can see where the family is getting this from, where, and again, there's pictures on the Instagram. It looks like the point of ignition was in the kitchen, because there is crude oil spilled all over and splattered up against the cabinets, or the lower cabinets. As far as like, I don't know, it very much confuses me as far as like where he was standing. He could have been like leaning against the counter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like where his hands were against the counter, and so that might have been the protected area. Mm-hmm. If this is what they're getting at, that's kind of like what I drew from that conclusion, because other than like him being up against something, it doesn't make sense to me that that's what they got from that. But again, it's not super clear. Again, whether it does indicate or not where he was standing. Again, the star witness said that he had poured the oil onto his head and it covered his entire body. If that were the truth, why were those?
Well, it jumped that spot.
Yeah, on the same spot on both wrists.
Yeah.
And those were the only spots of his body that were like that were like protected. So very big question mark on that, where we don't really know why or what this indicates, but we do know that it was not in the autopsy report, and the medical examiner had a very off conclusion as far as he was wearing gloves. But you can see his hands are burned. Mm-hmm. So does not make sense.
So I was kind of on the right trail there with my prediction.
What?
With what? Ligatures, and like you may have been bound, potentially, allegedly.
Yeah. To me, that was my initial thought when they said, okay, he's got 2 protected areas. Both of them are on his wrists, and that's it. Those are the only protected areas. Mm-hmm. My initial thought with that was he was bound.
Yeah.
None of the sources say anything about being bound, but yes, that was my initial thought as well. So it's potential, or that there was something on his wrists. This also, again, this eyewitness stated that David had a lighter, right? Something's got to light the fire. There was no lighter found at the scene, which is just very fishy. So we're talking about an apartment fire here. It's a small space, not like 90 acres, like we've talked about in some other cases where they're looking for a lighter in this giant abyss. It's an apartment. There was no lighter recovered. Now, there was no even like traces of the lighter. And I say that because, again, in all the crime scene photos, there is no lighter in any of the pictures. This witness also states, which is a kind of a confusing statement, and I quote, "My mom found it on the floor over by the kitchen table. She picked it up and she put it by the stove," in reference to this lighter that she said David had. Point number 1, in the pictures of the kitchen and kitchen table and of the stove, there are crime scene photos of this, and there is no lighter. 2, why was your mom at the crime scene? Why was she traipsing through this crime scene? Like, that does not make sense to me. And again, it could potentially be a point of like, all right, the police messed up here. They contaminated this crime scene was contaminated. Other people were handling the witness's mom was handling evidence. The lighter, the thing that lit the fire, the apartment on fire, and killed David, the witness's mom is handling it. Like, I just don't understand that.
Yeah.
But needless to say, this lighter is missing. And it's just disappeared without a trace, unless somebody took it. Now, there are crime scene photos that show this knife. Again, this witness stated David's in there with knives. He's a threat, yada, yada. There is a crime scene photo which shows that this knife laying on the floor, and it looks like a bread knife, like one of those big bread knives. It's sitting on the ground near where David was sitting. The knife is clean as a whistle. There is nothing on it. There is not blood. There is not debris. There is not soot. There is not skin. There not hair. Nothing. Nothing on it. The family believes that this was planted here by the Plymouth Police Department, which is the police department that headed this investigation. They said they tried that the police planted this knife here to back up their explanation of why they did not enter the home and perform rescue measures. Again, things are not adding up here. If you notice, like I said, like we talked about his wrists, and you can clearly see it in the autopsy photos, David's hands were extremely burnt and they were bloodied. How could he have been holding this knife, wielding this knife? The knife now is absolutely spotless, but David's hands are completely burnt and bloodied. Like, if he were holding that knife, his whether it be skin, his blood, his debris, it would be on it, right?
Yeah.
And in addition, to the photo of the knife mentioned by the family, there was a knife block in the kitchen where it looked like the knife had been removed from. If you look at this photo, it appears as if the knife was removed after soot was deposited. And I say that because if this is true, that means the knife was moved after the fire was over. That's what the family's getting at here. The only question I would come back with that is, could the knife have been moved during the fire when soot was already deposited, but the fire was still going on? As far as like during the fire, could David have grabbed the knife? Soot was already be deposited, but he didn't move it after the fire was completely over. Now, again, that does not add up, though, with the knife being perfectly pristine condition. That just doesn't add up. Mm-hmm. I will say that it took 32 months after the fire and after David's death for the police to provide the family with a copy of the police report. Have you ever requested a police report before? Like for an accident or insurance purposes?
I'm sure.
I'm sure. That thing, that kind of stuff. Now, granted, accident reports are a lot more simple than homicide or suicide investigations, those kind of things. But 32 months, that's an absurd amount of time.
Long time.
Yes, and it's to provide the family with it, not to provide the public with it, not to provide the press with it, the family. So, again, I will be very clear here. The family is openly stating that the Plymouth Police Department planted this evidence, as far as the knife goes, so that they could cover themselves on the explanation for not entering the apartment, and the suicide explanation, whole 9 yards. So they're trying to cover themselves up. So they're saying the police department is lying and they planted evidence. And they are openly saying that. Now, in this 32 months after, in this police report, there's a statement that reads, we believe that, in reference to the knife, we believe that it played no role in the events of this night. Think about that. That's a very intentional statement to put in there if they, one, didn't have a different stance on it first, to whether like David was wielding the knife or the suicide, what have you. And it seemingly does seem like that's the police kind of backtracking, because they may have tried to plant the knife there, realized that it looks fishy because there's literally nothing on the knife. It may or may not have been moved after the fire was already over, which would, bust them for planting it. So this statement, we believed it played no role in the events of this night. Maybe the police backtracking to be like, whoop, busted. We better adjust that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it makes sense, but it doesn't, again, it does not add up. There are definitely points of this investigation that did not go the way that they should have been, or there's a big questions here, especially with the medical examiner. This same eyewitness told authorities when she was walking them through what happened, she told authorities that David had pushed her out of the apartment and locked the door so that she could not get back in, and then lit the apartment on fire. This explanation supports the suicide theory, right? If David was actually committing suicide by fire. However, the door is this huge point of contention in the investigation. The family believes that, or states, they state as a fact that the door was never locked. So he pushed her out of the apartment, locked her out, but the door was never locked. That's fishy, or at least sounds fishy. Now, the family does state, there's another quote in here, and it's kind of similar to like the mom lighter statement where it just doesn't make a ton of sense. And this may just be because there's no clear factual picture of the events that played out. But the family states a maintenance man who extinguished David stated that the maintenance man himself did not have any keys to the apartment on him at the time. And when he arrived, the door was unlocked and open. My question, again, I question this because, one, if there's a maintenance man there, he's another witness, right? He could have a completely different, where's his story? When did all of a sudden this maintenance man come in? Mm-hmm. Why was he the one extinguishing David? And I assume by this they meant like when David got himself out, he was the one extinguishing David of any, fire or burns. Why was it the maintenance man that was doing this? I that's a true question I have. I do not understand. And again, this goes back to the point of, which is not mentioned, how David exited the apartment when he got himself out. If he exited the apartment through the door, then it makes sense why the door is unlocked. He let himself out. So it's very possible that the door could have been locked before that. He unlocked the door and got himself out. Did he even exit through the door? Is there signs of any forced entry as far as like this witness trying to get back in or authorities trying to get in? When did this maintenance man arrive where he saw that the door was unlocked and opened? Was this after authorities had already entered the apartment? Was this before? Was this before David had let himself out? Was it after? Like, there are a lot of questions around this door that we would need more answers to draw this conclusion of the door was never locked. Like the family is stating, it just doesn't, we're not quite there yet with this, the door was never locked thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can make that statement as a friend with the information that is out there. The family and the police may have more information that they have not shared, but with that, the door was never locked. This witness is lying. We need a little bit more information first before we can really jump on that conclusion. Now, the last thing is, before all of this, just, a point to consider before all of this took place. David had recently gone through a mental breakdown and spent some time in the hospital, in where he was diagnosed with having had an acute, nonspecific psychosis episode. The doctor said it was not clear what caused it. It potentially could have been drugs, but there were no drugs found in David's system. The family believes that this played a part against David in the investigation, to where the police really laid into these hospital records of him recently having had this mental episode, and supports the theory of David being crazy or committing suicide, being a danger, those kind of things. And due to this, the family believes that David was a victim of mental health discrimination and did not get a fair and thorough investigation. Again, based on the information that's out there, I do not think that this was a super thorough investigation. I lean more towards it was open and shut. The police were set on the fact that it was a suicide, or did not want to receive backlash for being wrong. And so they kind of closed it out and brushed it under the rug. Again, just around this case, there are a lot of questions, and some questions that the family also brings up on their Instagram page and on their website page. There is this point that is discussed of this wooden bench, and it's like this thick wooden bench, like with like 2x4s, where one of the legs is completely charred black, just one of them, and the bench is sitting up against this wall, but the wall itself has 0 burn marks on it. So they believe that this bench was moved there. And they are questioning, why was it moved? Who moved it? So there's a picture posted of the kitchen doorway, and you can see like kind of the side of this bench, and they mentioned, why is the bench here? And notice where the bench is. So this whole thing around the bench, which I agree, if the leg is completely charred, but the wall that it's up against has 0 burn marks whatsoever, and there's also a purse sitting on top of it, which has like oil splatters on it, but has 0 burn marks on it as well. It's questionable, right? It's there needs to be an explanation for that.
Yeah.
And there is none. So they definitely question to say, okay, we think this bench was moved. Who moved it? Why did they move it? Was it blocking the doorway? Did authorities move it to get to David? Did somebody try to block somebody at some point? It doesn't make sense. In front of the bench, in one of the pictures that they posted as well, is a set of keys on the floor. Again, this goes back to questioning, was the door locked? Who had their key? Did Emily have her keys? Did David have his keys? Why were these keys on the floor and they're sitting by this potentially moved bench? Just very odd. Now, again, there's a picture of the knife. There's a picture of David's arm, in which the family points out the protected area and the whole point of self-immolation being an extremely rare point or reason or way of suicide. An incredible amount of information that does not add up, and unanswered questions in this case. The family is currently petitioning to have this investigation redone thoroughly and really looked into. Last point here is I will say I did try to look up Emily, because I personally believe that she is this witness that they are referring to. I could not find a single thing on her. Not on social media, not on Google. I found one like background check site that like mentioned, and I'm pretty sure that's who they were talking about. But again, it wasn't like, it's like, oh, this may or may not be her phone number, right? It's not a bunch of like.
And the family is the one who is alleging that she is the witness?
By the way that their source is written,
Okay.
it is clear, or it is pretty safe to assume that they are referring to the witness as being Emily, but they don't come out and say it. They do not mention her name. Again, there is very, very little information on this case as far as like information that does not come from the family. There's an Instagram that the family runs. There's a website. There is a petition to get this case relooked at and reinvestigated. So I absolutely think it should be reinvestigated, whether the answer is suicide or not.
Yeah.
Because there's just way too much that does not make sense here.
No, I hear you. I'm all like, there's definitely botch jobs. There's definitely incompetence in some points when it comes to, you know, investigations and whatnot. But the planting shit, I always have a hard time with. I just don't like, that's just such like a movie kind of thing. And like,
I have a hard time with it.
Yeah. And like, don't get me wrong. Like it's possible and it's definitely happened, but yeah, that's what I have a hard time with. But no, I mean, a lot of the other things, like the wrist thing is the most damning thing.
Yeah.
From what it sounds like to me.
And actually, I will say, so as I was literally walking out the door on my way here, a listener tagged me in the most recent post from this Instagram, and the family had posted another crime scene photo where you can see the kitchen where I believe the fire was, that's where the point of ignition was, or it was where the witness said that David had poured that crude oil all over himself, and you can see there's crude oil everywhere. It's splashed up onto the lower cabinets, which I don't know. I would say like, hey, you need to have splatter analysis done on this to which direction it came from. Did it come from up? Did it come from down? But there are a ton of footprints in this oil that's on the floor. So my question with that is, did they analyze the footprints? Is it one set of footprints, one person's feet? Is it two people's feet? It is bare footprints that you can see, but again, that just made me go into a whole question of like, did they examine these footprints? So I don't know. I hope that more information does come out on this case. I think it is wildly uncovered in the media, and if it could get more media attention, I think that they would definitely get a better chance
Make
of
some
it.
Strides, yeah,
getting reinvestigated. But
damn. Well, yeah, we could revisit it if anything big breaks out of it too. So
yeah,
a lot of stuff going on there for sure. A lot of stuff. Sorry, Allie. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you everybody for listening. That's David Elmquist. We'll be back next week, and we'll be back obviously on Monday. So we'll see everybody then.